this is going to be confusing, but there's actually three kinds of estrogen. There's estrone, and estrone is a storage form of estrogen. It's considered to be a weaker form, kind of an immature form. It cannot convert to estradiol, and that's what you want. Estradiol is what you want to use for the reproductive cycle. It doesn't convert to that. It can it can convert to that, but it's most prevalent in postmenopausal women. When they talk about, why do they talk in postmenopausal women? Why do they want you to take estrogen treatment? What's the purpose of it? What's the symptom that they're trying to control? Hot flashes. And you got to remember this, that the purpose is to control hot flashes. We're not trying to save your life or anything with estrogen treatments. We're trying to control an uncomfortable symptom. Okay, and so what they're trying to do is they're trying to affect the estrol level. Then there's estriol 3. E3 is synthesized primarily in the placenta, and it may play a primary role in breast cancer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about cancer later, and how that sometimes is tied to birth control. But you notice it went to E1 to E3, okay? That's on purpose. The numbers do not mean order. The numbers have to do with the chemical makeup of it. So E1 and E3 are the minor forms of estrogen. E2 is the major form, estradiol. And what I did here is, if you've got a chance, and you're wrestling, you've got a client coming in, you've got an older client, you yourself, you're wrestling with estrogen treatments and so forth, definitely, absolutely read this article. You must read this article. This is on the National Institute of Health. It's www.nlm.nih.gov/medlineplus/druginformation.html, and just click on estrogen and read it. It's too valuable not to read. And what this does is it's 10 times more powerful than E1 and 80 times more powerful than E3. Those other two forms of estrogen. This estradiol is what really pushes you. It's produced by the growing follicle in the ovary. You want the follicle, if you want a balanced estrogen life, a life with estrogen in it that's growing up, you want that ovary to be developing these follicles, because as the follicle develops, it's sending up a signal to release estrogen into the body. And then when it's combined with progesterone, its primary role is to prepare the uterine lining for implantation of an embryo later on. And this is a critical component for bone structure. That is why immunization like Depo-Provera, or a shot like Depo-Provera, is called what's called black box warning. And that is, it's got a warning on it that says that there's a concern about it reducing the density of the bone if you're on it on a regular basis. And the primary reason is because it diminishes the development of estrogen in the body. Why? Because it's preventing the ovaries from going through the cycles. So it's reducing the ability of the body to develop its own natural estrogen, which is what feeds bone density. So that's what a black box warning is it's actually recognized for having that consequence. Now you have to remember that in the eyes of some people, having children is more dangerous than taking the risk of bone density. And if you were on Depo-Provera and you got off of Depo-Provera, then the ovaries start their cycle again, and then they say after a little while, your estrogen level is restored. The bone density problem is while you're on Depo-Provera. Okay, so we've got estrogen, and of course I already introduced the concept. Now we've got to talk about progesterone. And just think progestational. That's what the word is. It encourages continued gestation. It's from the corpus luteum. I have that circled. A corpus luteum is simply this. When the follicle develops in the ovary, it develops. The ovary gets the luteinizing hormone, LH. It releases it. The covering that was around that developing ovum or that developing egg continues to survive inside of the ovary. And it's called corpus luteum. It has to do actually with its appearance. It has kind of a yellowish appearance. And that corpus luteum is now communicating constantly in the body. And it's communicating with the egg now, the egg's traveling, and the corpus luteum reacts if there's a fertilization, if there's not a fertilization, and it reacts with the endometrium lining. So that corpus luteum begins to keep developing, and that's what I wanted to show here. You see here after day 14, it releases, but all of this structure that has developed around it continues to form and continues to thrive. If there is not a fertilization, it just dissipates and then the body goes through its normal menstrual cycle. If there is a fertilization, it brings out the whole new set of warriors who are now on duty to start communicating new messages, get the body ready because we're going to have a pregnancy. Some have suspected, they don't know this for sure, that the corpus luteum, upon the release of the egg, actually generates a progesterone signal that makes the egg like a homing signal for sperm. And there's one, you remember your elementary fertilization type instruction, there's only one egg that can fertilize it, even though there might be one sperm that can fertilize the egg, even though there's a bunch of sperm all around. Only one. And they sometimes suspect that corpus luteum sends out the signal for the one. They don't know, but that's one of the theories. It prepares the lining for implantation, so it's a critical component of preparing the lining. It causes the thickening of the cervical mucus. Now, oftentimes, if you read in some of the books, before people were very conscious on birth control, they talk about the value of thickening the mucus as a preventive infection. Because a lot of people still have sexual intercourse and so forth after conception has occurred, but now you've got to be very careful because this becomes a pretty vulnerable environment. And so you're trying to be very careful not to have anything. That's what the cervical mucus does. It's supposed to thicken things up. It also has that second mechanism of slowing down the possibility of sperm passing through. And some says it reduces the immune response of the baby. In other words, they believe the progesterone may also signal the body, possibly signal the thymus to tell it, don't worry, this is not an invading negative body. Even though it could be a different blood type than the mother's or anything, it's a communication again. And it actually is supposed to prevent lactation during pregnancy. Now, I know there's always going to be somebody who's going to tell you, I was leaking and I didn't even have a baby yet, I was just pregnant. But when it's all working right, you should not be lactating during the pregnancy when the progesterone is working. So if it does occur, you got to talk to your doctor, and they just kind of look at things. All right, so this is the other player, and then we have one more player, and this one is meaningful for us in the pregnancy resource centers. And that player is what we just call HCG, and we know about this because in the pregnancy center, it's produced by the placenta. It sustains the corpus luteum. It tells that where things are developing, keep working on the progesterone. It repels immune cells. It's a possible link to morning sickness. This HCG floating around, and it's what you measure in a pregnancy test. When somebody takes a pregnancy test, it measures the elevation of this hormone HCG in your system. And speed metabolism. I was driving in this morning, and I was saying to Diane, all I can think in my head is drink, drink, drink. You never see that movie, The Student Prince? Who's the actor in The Student Prince? Mario Alonso. Mario Alonso went on to an HCG diet because he was known for getting very heavy and crash dieting, very heavy and crash dieting. They suspect, they did not perform an autopsy on him, but they suspect that he was on this HCG diet that increases metabolism, and it killed him. So, remember that next time you're listening to Ave Maria. Okay, so these are the players. Now we'll get into it. What does this mean? Help, I'm going crazy. That's what it means. So, here's your menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle begins when you begin to shed. When you begin the bleeding part, and it goes through this. You'll see here, imagine this is the follicle. It's developing. It's gotten the stimulating hormone has been communicating to it. Luteinizing hormones going back and forth. It gets the signal. We're at this point. Zoom. Luteinizing hormone takes off. It's time now, and then the endometrium lining is building up because we've got a baby coming. Okay, the stimulated ovaries generates the estrogen. It goes up to the pituitary gland below the hypothalamus. And peaks day 13, 1 day before ovulation, you get the LH surge, and it comes down. And then ovulation occurs within 36 hours. When ovulation occurs, here's the empty follicle. It's coming around. It's now called the corpus luteum. And it's still sending out signals. It's saying, do we have a pregnancy? Don't we have a pregnancy? Okay, and so meanwhile, it's coming out of the ovary, beginning to work its way down the fallopian tube. So estrogen and progesterone are both being released. They begin to build up the endometrium lining. They begin to thicken the mucus. That's why also people who do natural family planning can measure where their cycle is based upon the mucus. And they've got gauges for that. Lifespan. Once an egg is released, it has to be fertilized within 12 to 24 hours. You know, do you ever wonder if the egg ended up in the toilet or something like that? No. The egg expires within 24 hours. And it doesn't even get through the fallopian tube. It doesn't get fertilized up there. The one thing to remember about sperm, however, is that it can survive up to 7 days, typically 3 to 4 days. So when you're dealing with a client and they talk about, well, we've had sexual relations and everything, but that was 2 days ago. I don't think I may, you know, this is the window. The sperm lives longer than the ovum does. So timing, 24 hours after ovulation, if fertilization does not take place, the corpus luteum regresses. It basically disintegrates, then estrogen and progesterone disintegrates, endometrium lining sheds, you have your menstrual cycle. If, however, and so then what it does is, now we're talking about hormonal birth control. What hormonal birth control wants to do, it wants to interrupt the pulsing. It wants to screw up the pulsing so that your body doesn't get the signal to either develop follicles or definitely not send you a luteinizing hormone surge. So that's the intent. The intent is. And I believe it probably works this way a vast majority of the time. Job number 2, of course, is what I mentioned to you about thickening that mucus and so forth to prevent it. Job number 3 is to diminish the uterine lining. It has to diminish the uterine lining. That is the way it works. It has to diminish uterine lining. You know, and the big question in the birth control book is how often does that happen? Just look at this bottom paragraph here. This was taken out of AmericanPregnancy.org. When contraceptive methods fail to prevent ovulation or fertilization, the changing in the uterine lining is used to prevent fertilized egg or life from implanting in the uterine wall. Is this action that leaves people believing they have crossed an ethical boundary? Now, mind you, every pharmaceutical guide related to hormone birth control lists the third mechanism. It's in there. I don't care. You can cry until Judgment Day. It doesn't change the reality. They list it. Planned Parenthood lists it. Everybody lists it. And all the advocates of birth control, hormonal birth control, deny it. It's just kind of a quirky thing, and not without just cause. And I'll show you. Does a third mechanism ever occur? Do occasional births to women on hormonal birth control suggest the lining is sufficient or rebuilds upon ovulation to sustain the pregnancy, or is it weakened because of synthetic hormones? That's the big question. This is out of a paper that was written in 2005, and it says here in this, how does it work? Of just the progestins, it basically comes down here and it says, transforms endometrium, making it unstable for nidation by inhibiting the synthesis of progesterone receptors. Therefore, yes, it says it works as a third mechanism. But if you go on to the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they say a thorough review of the medical literature uncovers ample data to support the first 2 methods. However, there is no direct evidence in the literature to support the third proposed method of action. And they say this was concluded also in the gynecological book. So what I did is I wrote my friend Dr. Walt Ehrmore, you know, and he's spoken for us before. And so Walt wrote me back yesterday morning. He said, Bob, I'm very familiar with them and their papers. It will be no surprise to you that they have not yet, through no lack of trying, been able to get their opinion published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. You are correct, in my opinion, in stating that their opinions exceed the available evidence. They argued from silence. They argued from silence because birth control companies are not going to be doing this research. So, the one other thing, and I'm just going to take 1 minute on this. One other thing about synthetic hormones. Your doctor does not give you, when he gives you a birth control, he does not give you real estrogen or real progesterone. because your body wouldn't process it right. You know, it has to be produced, that has to be produced in the body. They give you what's called synthetic estrogen or synthetic progesterone. The World Health Organization has stated that combination birth control is a class 1, that's the top rating, carcinogen. It's considered a class 1 cancer-causing agent. And the reason it is, and the way I look at it, to the best of my limited understanding, synthetic progesterone works like this, and natural progesterone can't get in there when when you have cases of cervical cancer and breast cancer. The way the scientists look at it is they say that the synthetic progesterone gets into your system. And so when you're producing natural estrogen, which can, when it's in the right quantity, help protect you against cancer, that these receptors on it get filled with the fake progesterone, with the synthetic progesterone. And as a result, one of the things that helps reduce cancer is if it was able to have a receptor to receive the actual progesterone. And so that's one of the things. And remember, it's the World Health Organization that calls it this, and they are in favor of birth control. And they also feel birth is more dangerous than cancer sometimes. And so that's why they still are big fans. All right, I am only, what? Right on time. He's been holding it at 0 for a long time. Right on time. Actually, it's supposed to be done at 11:35. But any questions? Sorry. Yes, and I'll repeat them when you ask.
One problem will be made, and since this is being videotaped, I'll pass the wand here so you can record it.
Can you say a little bit about the IUDs, that type of birth control?
Right. And it's been, in fairness, it's been a long time since I've studied the IUD, because the IUD, when it originally came out, the IUD was a mechanism for basically causing an agitation in the endometrium lining. It was a technique they learned from the nomads in the deserts. They used to stick stones in the vaginal areas, the uterine areas of camels so they wouldn't get pregnant, to create this mild infection. So that was the idea of how IUD works. Then they began to attach chemicals to it. I think the research in IUD is deplorably deceptive. I believe the IUD still works primarily. I just am never comfortable, based on what I've researched, ever advising anything. Because now they've added hormonal methods in with it. And I'm not a fan of hormonal. Yeah, they have a new one, and I don't know about it right now. I just haven't studied it. Other questions? Yeah.
What about postmenopausal women that are like still take the hormones as far as for the hot flashes, but it's a natural hormone, like a compounding hormone, where they compound it so it's natural ingredients? Are those still harmful? Or?
Well, you want natural. First of all, you want natural. Everything I've read, and I got a lot more reading to do on it, everything I've read, your body cannot metabolize natural hormones that are taken like orally or stuff like that. So I believe, and this goes contrary to probably what you've heard of it, I believe it's still some form of a synthetic. I just don't believe, because everybody that that was the first question I raised when I first got into the study this. Why don't we just give them natural estrogen and natural progesterone? And everybody who studies in this field says the body, you can't take it that way. It has to be modified in some way. And that's why it's probably administered in a compound, so it's kind of hidden and it gets in that way. But it's kind of like if you want to have a great discussion, find Dr. Bondo and start talking to him about should you go out and buy vitamins. I got a lecture on it in August when we were at the board meeting in Denver. Okay, and we are biting into your lunch hour, just so everybody knows, but that's fine with me. If you want to get up and leave, go ahead.
Could you speak about the morning after pill?
The morning after pill, I just answered a Q&A question on it last week. The morning after pill, you got to remember that you have a 24-hour window to get pregnant. So, can the morning after pill be an abortive patient? Yes. Yes. Out of 29 days, out of 30 days, 29 days, yes, for 1 day, it can be. If the time's right, it can be. The odds are in your favor that it wouldn't be. So does that mean if everyone took a morning after pill, for whatever reason they took one, that they committed an abortion? No. Does it mean they could have? Possibly. And one of the issues that still hasn't been resolved, and I've got some papers and I don't want to comment on them yet, But one of the things that hasn't been resolved is that if fertilization does occur, to what degree does the natural hormonal action of estrogen and progesterone override the synthetic action? Because there are breakthrough pregnancies. My concern is, from everything I've read, is that you can also have an ectopic pregnancy, which is never designed to build up, to take it. So it's not a big trick it's not necessarily a big trick to have an implantation of an embryo. And I think once you get an embryo that does take, on occasion, in a depleted endometrial lining, that it wouldn't surprise me that the body would then, once it's implanted, take over and start to feed it. But I still think, everything I'm reading suggests to me that there's a lot of flushing going on. A lot of things that it's just not friendly to it. Anything else? Yes, sir.
This abortion that's going on. First abortion is 30% breast cancer. Second abortion is 80% breast cancer. So what you're talking about in abortion is a big deal in breast cancer right now.
Right. In fact, I just emailed with
A lot of women don't realize, and men that should be supporting their women, don't realize this. I didn't know about it until I started listening to some good science stuff too.
Yep. Yep.
Just
people have asked me, if we get all through all this, okay, you ignore all the science, what would you do? I'll level with you, and you can disagree with me, and fine, you would be the first one to ever disagree with me. But I would, unless it's a particular medical condition, like problem bleeding with endometrial lining and so forth, those are problem issues. I am just not, after what I've read and so forth, I would stay away from hormonal contraception, and we didn't talk about motive, which needs to be talked about. We didn't talk about all the different methods, but hormonal methods of birth control, I think, and then there's been this ongoing debate as that it's been going on since the 1960s. It's all getting into the water system now, and they're talking about different issues with that now, and so it's a crazy world. So, all right, we need to stop. I need you guys to eat, and I need you to be back up here at 12:40.
Did you see